Verse 23. They were urgent. The crowd is the they. They were urgent, demanding with loud cries that he, Jesus, should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. Perhaps four of the biggest words in Scripture that we've never noticed before. Their voices prevailed. There's an interesting word picture and a metaphor here on verse 23. Urgent. Your clue says, lie across burning coals. Okay? When you look up the definition of this word in Scripture and how it's used in other places, this is the picture it paints. Urgent, like when you lay something on burning coals. So when you first start a campfire, it takes a minute, you got to breathe on, it's taking some time, come on, we need to get some coals going. But once you have an established fire going, how many seconds do you have to put something in there before you can take it out and it's not affected? One or two? Thank you. Yeah. If you put a piece of paper, or a book in the fire, seconds, right? It's going to go. And at Sukkot, actually, I'm pretty sure it was this year, we had a fire going, we're out there chilling, guitars and everything, and I think it was you, that you went over and picked up a pallet and walked over and set it on there, and then what? What every natural human being has to do? They have to stand on it for a second, yeah. And I remember I was in middle school, no? Come on, normal human beings. I was in middle school, and summertime, kids are out of school, hey, what are we going to do? We're going to tear down your dad's shed because it's rotten and it's falling down, right? Okay, me and Neil, I got a text from Neil today, as a matter of fact. Neil and I knocked the shed down on itself, and it's these big pieces of plywood. The thing was rotten, it needed to go. Lit that sucker on fire, and then what do? We stood on those big old pieces of plywood like this, and we were like, no, no, and then the flames are going. It was awesome. That's normal, huh? Yeah. Okay. Normal for us. I think about those two examples when I think about the picture of lie something across coals, or the crazy people that walk across hot coals. You don't have very long in that moment to save whatever you just put in. There is not much time there, and that paints a picture of the urgency that some people put on all of us when they ask you to do something, or when they're caught in an emergency and they keep their problem on you. But the other metaphor is even more interesting. This is it. The pressure of a violent storm. That was what I got out of studying that passage, that word, the word urgent, the pressure of a violent storm. And I thought about us, obviously, in this neck of the woods. When we get a storm here, there's a lot going on. You know what I mean? Like when a hurricane, there's something going on out in the Caribbean. What do they look at with the spaghetti model? What are the factors that they look at when they try to figure out where it's going and what it's going to do and the strength it's going to have? Pressure. What kind of pressure? Barometer. What the barometer is measuring, right. The barometric pressure of the atmosphere. And you know what it should be? When it's a problem, no bueno. Today it's about 30 to 36. I looked.
It's up in the 90s.
90 is the problem. If it passes 90 and gets towards 100, not good. Yep. But what's the other big one? We hear it every year. The temperature of the Gulf. Every storm, they talk about that. Is the storm, is it going to gather strength? Is it going to organize? And it's based on three things. Based on the temperature of the Gulf, it's based on the cold fronts that can come, which this year, cold front came from Texas, pushed Sally to Alabama. Done. Out of our hair, or out of our hair. And then the third thing is the pressure of the atmosphere. That is fascinating to me, because when I think about the word pressure, every storm that comes, without fail, Lindley and I get on the phone, and we talk about 3 days and then 2 days out before a storm, without fail. And it's always a chill and calm conversation. Hey, man, what you doing? I don't know, man, what you thinking? Well, and you know if it's really bad this year? If it's really, really bad, I called my brother in Covington, I called him. That's when you know it's bad in Cleveland, okay? And I'm telling you that story because that shows you that the pressure is not there yet. That's 3 days out. He and I do not talk on the phone during the eye of the storm. And my point in saying that is because this word urgent shows that it is when it is in the height of the battle. It is when the heat is on, when the storm is here, the eye of the storm is over us. It is urgent, urgent. They just kept pushing Pilate and pushing him. And I look at him, and earlier I said, did he have a backbone? Well, to be honest, come on, a crowd is pushing you with urgency and urgency. Maybe most of us would cave in. I don't know. To save your own soul, or to save your political career, or just to get the heck out of Dodge and not get stormed by a crowd. I don't know. I wasn't there. But it made me wonder, why did he give in? Why did he give in? He said 3 times it wasn't going to happen. Well, the crowd was urgent. And those are 2 interesting word pictures, to push and say, no, it is in the moment. We have to deal with this. Come on, come on, come on. I can't imagine what that was like, but the pressure of a violent storm, we know what that's like when it gets to be in the moment. I skipped a few verses, and I know a lot of you guys, because I put in the email, stop at verse 25, but there's a couple more. Jesus said a really famous thing, because a lot is said about what his phrases were from this before he got on the cross. And one of them was verse 29. Blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bore and the breasts that never nursed. I've always heard that, but I never paid attention to it because I didn't think that applied to me. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. Never understood what that meant. But verse 31 stood out to me. Because Jesus said, if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it's dry? And I'll tell you where my mind went for that. I don't know if you've ever heard this. When someone says, we have hurricanes, we have wildfires, we have mudslides, we have tsunamis, oh my gosh, the world's coming to an end. That's where my mind went. When people just think like, oh my goodness, it couldn't get any worse, and society is on edge, and we're at the end of our road with natural disasters, and it's just getting so bad. That's where my mind went with the idea of the wood is green. And I don't know if I'm going to explain this very well, but verse 31, if they do these things when the wood is green, I think that means Jesus is with them. He has walked with them, he has eaten with them, he has taught with them, he has confronted them, he has done miracles right in their presence. If they will do these things when I'm here, what will it be like when I'm not here? If they'll do these things when green wood, is green wood flammable? Not at all. It's terrible. It's wet, sometimes it's muddy, it's holding moisture, there's no way it's going to be light. You can blow on all you want with a flame, right? It's not going to happen. What will happen when the wood is dry and it's combustible and it's on the edge of taking off? Your clue says kindling, I think. Man, kindling's a whole different story. It only takes a spark, right? Little flame, little spark, little oxygen on it, and it's going to roll. I think the point of that verse, if I can stretch a little bit, I think the point of that is the word intent. When you've got an opportunity to do something, or you've got to look at the situation, the environment that you're in, and ask the question, what am I doing, or what are my options here? It's interesting when you measure your environment around you and you figure out, are things good right now? Are they pretty flammable? Are they pretty toxic? Are they ready to explode? I don't know, that's a tough one. Verse 35 is my next one. Jesus said in verse 34, forgive them, which is obviously a famous thing. The guys were casting lots to divide his garments. Verse 35, the people stood by watching, but the rulers scoffed at him. You kind of have 2 options when something's going on. When someone's going through a bad day, right, or a bad moment, you say, ouch, I feel for that person. Or you say, he made his bed, he's got to lie in it. Shrug your shoulders. But the rulers stood and scoffed at him, saying, he saved others, let him save himself. If he is the Christ of God, his chosen one. Those dudes watched, they were judgmental, and they scoffed. I said that you can say, so-and-so made their bed, let them lie in it, because sometimes at the end of the day, you just got to let somebody deal with the consequences. I get that. But in this case, we know that, partially we know hindsight that this had to happen. Okay, we get that. On the other hand, it's an innocent dude thrown to the wolves, right? But he vehemently, urgently, contempt, all kinds of things thrown literally and figuratively at the situation. And they say, if he is the Christ of God, the chosen one. We've heard a lot of comments, I think, and here's the biggest one. You guys remember this phrase? It's their fault for living in a bowl and not evacuating. Sorry, phrase. We've all heard that phrase, right? And about 4 days ago, I borrowed a book from somebody and I couldn't put it down. I finished it this morning. And it's all about that question right there. Why didn't we evacuate? Why did people here evacuate? Forgive me, I shouldn't take ownership of that. It is absolutely fascinating, especially hindsight, Monday morning quarterback. You can say all you want. Why didn't somebody do this? Why didn't they do this? But when you're in the moment, verse 35, and you're standing there looking at somebody, watching, what do you say to somebody that is at the worst moment in their life, literally dying, being tortured? Probably the biggest word in this sentence, I'll give you the technical definition of it. The primary participle of conditionality. You got it? You know what that is? Everybody's been documenting sentences and breaking up the parts of speech. The primary participle of conditionality. No? People stood by watching. The rulers scoffed at him, saying, he saved others, let him save himself. If. It's a test. If he really is the Son of God, if he really is the Christ, the Messiah, the chosen one, if he really is capable of this, if he really is God himself in the flesh among us, if he really did those miracles, if he really is all these things, let him save himself. He saved others. That's a huge word. Because on one hand, I think to myself, those dudes were questioning their own beliefs and waiting for that dude to come off the cross and act like a king, which there have been a lot of comments about why he wasn't acting like more of a king, or why he wasn't implementing his kingdom on earth and all those things. Instead, what they do, they scoffed, they questioned, they judged. Last one, verse 42, we get to the very end of this part right before he dies. It's an interesting conversation between these two criminals, right, and Jesus. And one of them is a little bit nasty, we've always taken that for granted, and one of them is a little more contrite, and he says, we did, verse 41, 42, you're under the same sentence of condemnation, we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. This man has done nothing wrong. And he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he said to him, truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. I read an interesting article, post from Skip Bowen, about the word remember. So many times Matt has talked about the word faith. What is faith? What is that word? Is it a noun? Something you possess? Robert?
It's a verb.
Is a verb. Skip made the point that the word remember here, his instruction to Jesus, or his plea to Jesus, or his request, was not, hey Jesus, remember me and check the logbook in the Lamb's, register when you get there at the door, that kind of thing. And it wasn't like, hey, tell a funny story about me. And it wasn't just recall that you had a conversation with me at this one point. It wasn't a mental request. The word remember wasn't meant just a thought. It's an action word. He's asking, begging. He's about to die as well, right? He's saying, please remember me. Forgive, restore, invite me, come alongside me. Guy, remember. I mean, the guy is bringing up his faith in this moment, saying, hey, when you're in the kingdom. That's huge. And that hit me kind of between the eyes because I don't know if you've ever had this. I'm walking out of somebody's office and they say, hey, pray for me. Say a prayer for me. Wednesday, we went to a guy's house who has cancer. rough chemo right now. And I'm walking out the door, got my hand on the doorknob, and I'm pulling it shut, and he says, hey, say a prayer for me. For me, I'm not very loud and, whatever in that moment. I say, okay, and I walk out the door. It's more of a mental thing. It's more of a knowledge thing. It's more of a, you listen to my story and you're feeling for me and all that stuff. It's not very much action on my part to, in the moment, act and say, man, let me ask God's help for you where you're at. But I don't know if that ties in, but it kind of hit me square between the eyes this week. You got your crossword puzzle filled in?
90%.
What you missing?
Can't see the number.
No?
Six across.
What's the verse?
Kindling versus wheat.
Green wood. Christian's going to come up here and play a song. And I'm going to tell you a really interesting thing that somebody told me one time. I think it was Sean, but I don't want to put words in his mouth. Somebody looked at me and said, you're one of the most selfless people I know. After digging a little bit the last couple of weeks, it didn't sit well with me at the time when I heard those words. I don't tell you that to brag. I tell you that because I'm humble. Because it's not sitting well. I don't know if it's a very good compliment. This whole thought of selfless and this whole, I know it's brief and we didn't go a lot of places, but looking at those dudes, those guys, there was political people, military people, civilians, and religious people, all mixed in that one event, trial to crucifixion. And it was a mess. And the more I read it, and the slow down and read it again, you realize it is a weird mess. There was a lot going on there. There's so much tradition between, we've talked so many times about the Roman rule and the Jewish traditions and the faith that they tried to live out, but they weren't allowed to in some cases, and the oppression and, man, all that stuff. And like I said a minute ago, that word intent is fascinating. Because it makes you want to ask the question, why do you do what you do? And there was a time, Bobby just graduated Wednesday, there was a time, I know in his class, because I did the class, the difference between a whole bunch of criminal acts that you can be charged with is one word: intent. It's all over the place. And that I got questions wrong on the test because of one word: intent. I just read this whole book. And I don't mean to bring up something sour, but it's about St. Bernard Parish and St. Rita's nursing home, because people died there. The whole book is questioning one thing: what was the owner's intent? Were they trying to make money and not evacuate because they didn't want to lose revenue? That was the accusation. Were they rich? Were they on a cruise ship? Were they shopping? Did they really care that 35 people under their care died? And the whole discovery process of 2 years and a trial, it all was boiling down to one question: what was their intent? It reminds me of so many conversations we've had about, when someone looks at you and says, I didn't know you went to church. It happened to me this week. And I remember Matt telling that story up here. Crap, man, that is rough. And you don't know if someone's watching you that close. It shouldn't take a Walmart ad to tell us to be generous. All these Christmas gifts to tell us to be generous. What's your intent? Check people off the list, or be generous and love people and see them smile by giving them something fun? I don't know. Why do you come? Why do we come here, on a weekly basis to look at this or be entertained or listen to sermons, or just to scratch the surface to say, what was God doing through sending Christ, Messiah, and just unpacking so many people's lives? It's fascinating.